The year was 1206, and across the vast steppes of Mongolia, a man named Temujin had just united the warring tribes under a new title, Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. What followed would be one of history's most expansive conquests, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. But within this grand narrative of empire building lies a more complex and often overlooked story: the experiences of women within and around the Mongol world. To understand the fate of women during the Mongol conquests, we must first understand the context of 13th century warfare and society. This was an era when the treatment of civilian populations, particularly women, during military campaigns, followed brutal patterns that were unfortunately common across many civilizations. The Mongols, however, operated on a scale that was unprecedented in human history. The Mongol military machine was remarkably efficient and organized. When a city or settlement resisted Mongol rule, the consequences were severe for all inhabitants. Historical sources, including the Persian chronicler Juvayni and the Chinese records from the Yuan dynasty, document that conquered populations faced various fates depending on their perceived usefulness to the Mongol war effort. Women, in particular, found themselves categorized by the Mongols according to their potential contributions to the empire. Skilled craftswomen, those with administrative abilities, and women from noble families were often spared immediate harm because they represented valuable human resources. The Mongols had a pragmatic approach to conquest. They sought to maximize the economic and strategic benefits of their victories. The concept of marriage and family within Mongol society was complex and differed significantly from contemporaneous European or Chinese customs. Mongol women traditionally held more autonomy than their counterparts in many sedentary civilizations. They could own property, participate in trade, and even lead military units. This cultural background influenced how the Mongols integrated women from conquered territory. Historical records indicate that Genghis Khan himself had multiple wives, a practice that was both traditional among Mongol nobility and strategically important for forming political alliances. His primary wife, Orte, whom he rescued from kidnappers early in his career, held significant influence throughout his reign. This personal experience may have shaped some of his policies regarding the treatment of women in conquered territory. The practice of taking wives from defeated enemies served multiple purposes within the Mongol system. It created bonds between the conquering Mongols and local populations, potentially reducing the likelihood of rebellion. It also allowed for the integration of useful skills and knowledge from different cultures into the Mongol administration. However, we must acknowledge that for the women involved, this often meant separation from their families and communities under traumatic circumstances. Archaeological evidence and historical accounts suggest that the Mongols established a complex system for managing populations in conquered territory. Women with specific skills, weavers, administrators, interpreters, or healers, were often relocated to areas where their abilities were most needed. This displacement, while serving Mongol interests, represented profound disruption to individual lives and family structure. The famous traveler Marco Polo, writing about his experiences in the Mongol Empire decades after Genghis Khan's death, described a society where women from various backgrounds had been integrated into Mongol households and administrative structure. His accounts, while sometimes exaggerated, provide glimpses into how this integration functioned in practice. Chinese historical sources, particularly the Yuan Shi, history of the Yuan dynasty, contain numerous references to women from conquered territories who rose to positions of influence within the Mongol court. These accounts suggest that while the initial conquest was traumatic, some women were able to navigate the new system and achieve relative security or even power. The Mongol legal code, known as the Yesa, contains specific provisions regarding the treatment of women. While some of these laws provided protections, they also codified practices that would be considered deeply problematic by modern standards. The code reflected Mongol attempts to create order within their vast, multicultural empire. But this order came at enormous human cost. One aspect often overlooked in popular accounts is the role that Mongol women themselves played in these policies. Genghis Khan's daughters were given significant political authority and often ruled over conquered territory. Their perspectives on integrating women from defeated populations would have influenced imperial policy, though historical records of their specific views are limited. The practice of sororate and levirate marriage, common in Mongol culture, also affected how women from conquered territories were treated. These customs, where women could marry brothers or other male relatives of deceased husbands, provided some security but also limited women's autonomy in choosing their life partner. Trade and cultural exchange were central to Mongol imperial strategy, and women played crucial roles in these activities. Many women from conquered territories became involved in the Silk Road trade networks that the Mongols protected and expanded. This economic integration provided opportunities but also created new forms of dependency. The Mongol Empire's religious tolerance policy had significant implications for women from different faith backgrounds. Unlike many conquerors of their era, the Mongols generally allowed conquered peoples to maintain their religious practices. This meant that Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, and other women could often continue their religious observances, though they might be required to participate in Mongol shamanic rituals as well. Historical accounts from different regions of the empire show varying patterns in how women were treated. In Central Asia and Persia, where urban civilizations with complex administrative structures existed, educated women were often incorporated into governmental roles. In more rural areas, the patterns of integration looked different, often focusing on agricultural or pastoral contribution. The phenomenon of cultural blending that occurred throughout the Mongol Empire created unique situations for women. Children born from unions between Mongol men and women from conquered territories often served as cultural bridges, helping to integrate diverse populations into the imperial system. These children and their mothers played important roles in the long-term stability of Mongol rule. Medical knowledge and practices provide another lens through which to examine women's experience. The Mongols were interested in useful technologies and knowledge from all their conquered territories. Women with medical expertise, midwifery skills, or knowledge of local healing practices were valued and often protected because of their specialized ability. The seasonal migrations that characterized Mongol life created additional challenges and opportunities for women from sedentary civilization. Learning to adapt to nomadic life, including skills like horseback riding, caring for livestock, and managing portable households, became necessary survival skills for many women integrated into Mongol society. Language and communication barriers were significant factors in determining women's experiences. Those who could learn Mongolian or serve as interpreters often found better situations than those who remained isolated by language differences. The Mongol Empire's need for multilingual administrators created opportunities for some women to achieve positions of relative influence. The Mongol postal system, known as the Yam, employed women in various capacities, including as innkeepers and message carriers. This system, which was crucial for imperial communication across vast distances, provided economic opportunities for women throughout the empire, including those originally from conquered territory. Seasonal festivals and celebrations within Mongol culture required the participation of women from all backgrounds. These events served multiple purposes. They reinforced imperial unity, provided opportunities for cultural exchange, and allowed the empire to display its diversity and wealth. For individual women, these gatherings might represent rare opportunities to connect with others from their original communities. The Mongol approach to urban planning and settlement also affected women's lives significantly. When the Mongols established new cities or reorganized existing ones, they often grouped people according to their skills rather than their ethnic origin. This meant that women with similar abilities might find themselves living together regardless of their cultural backgrounds, creating new forms of community. Agricultural policies throughout the empire had gendered implications. In regions where women traditionally participated in farming, the Mongols generally maintained these practices. However, in areas where they introduced new crops or farming techniques, women often had to adapt to unfamiliar agricultural roles and responsibilities. The famous Mongol intelligence network relied heavily on information gathering at local levels, and women often played crucial roles in this system. Their positions in households, markets, and social networks made them valuable sources of information about local conditions, potential rebellions, or resources that might be useful to the imperial administration. Craft production was another area where women's skills were highly valued by the Mongol administration. Textile production in particular was crucial for outfitting the Mongol military and for trade purposes. Women with expertise in silk weaving, carpet making, or other specialized crafts often found their skills in high demand throughout the empire. The Mongol practice of decimal organization, where populations were organized into units of 10, 100,000, and 10,000, had specific implications for family structures and women's roles. This system, originally developed for military purposes, was also applied to civilian populations and affected how women related to imperial authority. Marriage customs and practices varied significantly across the vast Mongol Empire, and women from conquered territories had to navigate these differences. Some found themselves in polygamous households, where they had to establish relationships with multiple wives, while others became primary wives in new households. These arrangements often required considerable adaptation and negotiation. The role of shamanism in Mongol culture created unique situations for women with religious or spiritual abilities. Female shamans, whether originally Mongol or from conquered territories, could achieve significant influence within their community. The Mongols' respect for spiritual power meant that women with recognized shamanic abilities often found protection and status. Economic opportunities within the empire varied greatly depending on location and individual circumstances. Some women became involved in long-distance trade, while others focused on local markets. The Mongol Empire's emphasis on commerce and trade created possibilities that might not have existed in their original societies, though accessing these opportunities often required significant personal adaptation. The Mongol military's need for support services created roles for women throughout the empire. These included provisioning armies, manufacturing military equipment, and providing medical care to wounded soldiers. While these roles often developed from traditional women's work, their scale and importance within the imperial system gave them new significance. Educational opportunities, while limited by the standards of any society in the 13th century, existed within certain parts of the Mongol Empire. Women who could read and write in multiple languages were particularly valued for administrative purposes. Some women, from conquered territories, found that their literacy skills, perhaps developed in their original communities, became pathways to improved circumstances. The question of resistance and adaptation is crucial to understanding women's experiences. Historical records suggest that responses varied enormously. Some women found ways to maintain connections to their original cultures while adapting to Mongol society. Others became fully integrated into Mongol life and culture. Still others maintained forms of quiet resistance throughout their lives. Climate and geography played important roles in shaping women's experiences across different parts of the empire. Those integrated into communities in the Mongolian steppes faced very different challenges from those in the cities of Central Asia or the agricultural regions of China. These environmental factors influenced daily life, economic opportunities, and social relationships. The Mongol Empire's legal system, while containing the harsh Yasa code, also included local legal traditions in many areas. This meant that women might simultaneously be subject to Mongol imperial law and local customs regarding marriage, property rights, and family relationships. Navigating these overlapping legal systems required considerable skill and knowledge. Cultural preservation and adaptation occurred simultaneously throughout the empire. Women often played key roles in maintaining cultural traditions, languages, and practices from their original communities, while also adopting elements of Mongol culture. This cultural blending created new hybrid traditions that characterized much of the Mongol Empire. The empire's approach to taxation and tribute affected women's economic roles significantly. In some regions, women became responsible for producing goods required as tribute, while in others, They participated in the monetary systems that developed to handle imperial taxation. These economic responsibilities often determined women's daily activities and social relationships. Transportation and mobility within the empire created both opportunities and challenges for women. The Mongol Empire's road systems and protection of travelers made long-distance movement safer than it had been in many previous eras. However, the nomadic lifestyle required by some circumstances demanded skills that women from sedentary backgrounds had to learn. The intergenerational effects of Mongol policies toward women are visible in historical records spanning several decades. Children and grandchildren of women integrated into Mongol society often occupied different social positions than their ancestors, and their experiences help illustrate the long-term consequences of imperial policies. Seasonal work patterns throughout the empire often reflected both Mongol traditions and local customs. Women might find themselves participating in traditional Mongol activities during certain seasons while maintaining their original cultural practices at other times of the year. This seasonal rhythm became characteristic of life in many parts of the empire. The Mongol Empire's communication networks required people who could function as cultural intermediaries, and women often filled these crucial roles. Their positions in households and communities made them natural bridges between different cultural groups within the empire. Regional variations in imperial policy meant that women's experiences differed significantly depending on where they lived within the empire. Policies that worked well in Central Asian cities might be modified for agricultural communities in China or pastoral regions in Eastern Europe. The role of memory and storytelling in preserving women's experiences cannot be overlooked. Many accounts of women's lives during this period were preserved through oral traditions before being written down decades or centuries later. These stories, while sometimes altered by time and retelling, provide valuable insights into individual experiences. Technological innovations facilitated by the Mongol Empire's cultural exchange affected women's work and daily life. New tools, techniques, and materials became available across vast distances, often changing traditional women's work patterns and creating new economic opportunities. The empire's emphasis on meritocracy, while limited by the standards of its time, meant that women with valuable skills could sometimes achieve positions of influence, regardless of their ethnic origin. This aspect of Mongol administration created opportunities that might not have existed in their original societies. Diplomatic marriages and political alliances remained important throughout the Mongol Empire's existence, and women continued to play crucial roles in these arrangements. However, the scale of the empire meant that such marriages often involved much greater distances and cultural differences than had been typical in earlier periods. The preservation of historical records regarding women's experiences presents ongoing challenges for modern historians. Many accounts were written by male authors who had limited understanding of women's perspectives, and some records were lost or destroyed over the centuries following the empire's decline. Archaeological evidence continues to provide new insights into women's lives during the Mongol period. Burial sites, household remains, and artifacts help supplement written records and sometimes challenge traditional interpretations of historical events. The Mongol Empire's influence on subsequent historical developments affected women's roles and opportunities for centuries after its peak. Legal traditions, cultural practices, and social structures established during the Mongol period continued to influence women's lives in many regions long after the empire's political power had ended. Comparative analysis with contemporaneous societies helps contextualize women's experiences within the Mongol Empire. While the scale and methods of Mongol conquest were unique, some of the social patterns and adaptations were similar to those found in other medieval societies facing similar challenges. The question of agency versus coercion remains central to understanding women's experiences during this period. Historical evidence suggests that individual responses varied enormously and that women found different ways to exercise choice and influence within the constraints of their circumstance. Medical and demographic evidence, while limited for this historical period, suggests that population movements and cultural mixing associated with Mongol expansion had significant effects on family structures, childbearing patterns, and community organization throughout the empire. The role of environmental factors in shaping women's experiences cannot be understated. Drought, climate change, and natural disasters affected the Mongol Empire throughout its existence, and women often bore particular responsibilities for helping their communities adapt to changing environmental conditions. Trade relationships established during the Mongol period created long-term economic networks that continued to provide opportunities for women's participation in commerce. For generations after the empire's political decline, these networks became part of the foundation for later economic development across Eurasia. The Mongol Empire's approach to urban development and city planning had lasting effects on women's daily lives. New cities built or reorganized under Mongol rule often featured different architectural styles, market arrangements, and social spaces that reflected the empire's multicultural character. Religious syncretism, encouraged by Mongol policies, created unique situations for women from different faith traditions. The blending of religious practices often resulted in new forms of spiritual expression that incorporated elements from multiple traditions. The empire's military organization continued to affect civilian life long after active conquest ended. Women throughout the empire lived within social structures that had been shaped by military priorities and continued to reflect these influences in their daily organization and relationships. Educational and intellectual exchange facilitated by the Mongol Empire created opportunities for some women to access knowledge and ideas from distant parts of the world. While formal education remained limited, informal learning through cultural contact expanded many women's understanding of different ways of life. The question of historical interpretation remains important when examining women's experiences during this period. Different historical sources often provide conflicting accounts, and modern historians must carefully evaluate evidence while acknowledging the limitations of available records. The Mongol Empire's legacy regarding women's roles and experiences continues to influence historical understanding and cultural memory in many regions of the world. These influences can be seen in legal traditions, cultural practices, and social attitudes that persist to the present day. Understanding the experiences of women during the Mongol period requires acknowledging both the trauma and disruption caused by conquest and the complex adaptations that people made within new circumstances. This historical examination serves as a reminder of human resilience, while also highlighting the enormous costs of imperial expansion on individual lives and community. The stories of these women, preserved through fragmentary historical records, remind us that behind every great historical transformation lie countless individual experiences of loss, adaptation, and survival. The administrative structure of the Mongol Empire created unprecedented opportunities for some women to participate in governance at various levels. Records from the Yuan dynasty show that women from conquered territories occasionally served as interpreters, tax collectors, and even regional administrators. These positions, while often achieved through difficult circumstances, provided some women with economic independence and social influence that might not have been available in their original society. Seasonal festivals and ceremonies throughout the empire required extensive preparation and organization, tasks that often fell to women regardless of their ethnic background. The celebration of Mongol holidays like Sagan Sar alongside local festivals created complex cultural calendars that women had to navigate while maintaining household responsibilities and contributing to community celebration. The empire's vast postal relay system, known as the Yam, employed thousands of people across Eurasia, including women who served as innkeepers, stable managers, and provisioners. Women from conquered territories who demonstrated reliability and organizational skills could find stable employment within this system, though the work was demanding and required constant interaction with travelers from across the empire. Archaeological excavations at former Mongol administrative centers have revealed evidence of workshops where women from various cultural backgrounds worked together, producing textiles, metalwork, and other goods for imperial use. These workshops represent early examples of industrial organization that brought together diverse skills and techniques from across the known world. The Mongol approach to siege warfare and city conquest created specific patterns in how civilian populations, particularly women, were processed and categorized. Historical accounts describe systematic approaches to identifying useful skills, family connections, and potential value to the imperial administration. While this process was undoubtedly traumatic, it also reflects the Mongols' practical approach to human resources. Climate variations across the vast empire meant that women had to adapt to dramatically different environmental conditions depending on where they were relocated. Those moved from temperate agricultural regions to the harsh steppes of Mongolia faced particularly difficult adjustments. Learning to cope with extreme temperature variations, different food sources, and nomadic lifestyle requirements. The Mongol military's need for intelligence gathering created roles for women as information collectors and observers. Their positions in households, markets, and social networks made them valuable assets for understanding local conditions, potential threats, and opportunities for imperial expansion. Some women from conquered territories found that providing useful intelligence could improve their circumstances significantly. Trade routes protected and expanded by the Mongol Empire created opportunities for entrepreneurial women to establish businesses spanning vast distances. Historical records mention women who became successful merchants, dealing in silk, spices, precious metals, and other valuable commodities that moved along the Silk Road networks. The empire's approach to cultural preservation was complex and often contradictory. While the Mongols generally allowed conquered peoples to maintain their religious and cultural practices, they also actively promoted cultural exchange and mixing. Women often found themselves serving as cultural mediators, helping to bridge differences between various ethnic groups within their communities. Medical knowledge and healing practices represented another area where women's expertise was highly valued throughout the empire. The Mongols actively collected medical knowledge from conquered territories, and women with skills in herbalism, midwifery, and traditional healing often found themselves in demand across different regions of the empire. The question of consent and agency in marriages arranged within the imperial system remains complex and difficult to assess from historical records. While modern standards would clearly classify many of these arrangements as coercive, some historical accounts suggest that women occasionally found ways to influence these decisions or make the best of difficult circumstances. Educational opportunities varied significantly across different regions of the empire, but in some areas, particularly those with established scholarly traditions, women could access learning that was unusual for their time period. The Mongol interest in useful knowledge meant that educated women, regardless of their ethnic background, could sometimes find positions that utilized their intellectual abilities. The empire's legal system created interesting contradictions regarding women's rights and status. While the Yasa Code contained harsh provisions, local legal traditions often continued to operate alongside imperial law, creating situations where women might have different rights and protections depending on which legal framework applied to their specific circumstance. Craft guilds and professional organizations that developed within Mongol cities often included women from diverse backgrounds working together. These organizations provided some protection and mutual support for their members, and they helped preserve and transmit specialized knowledge and techniques across cultural boundaries. The Mongol Empire's influence on family structures extended far beyond the immediate conquest period. Intermarriage between Mongols and women from conquered territories created new kinship networks that lasted for generations and helped integrate diverse populations into the imperial system over time. Archaeological evidence from burial sites across the former empire provides insights into how women from different cultural backgrounds were integrated into Mongol society. Grave goods, burial practices, and skeletal analysis help historians understand both the material conditions of women's lives and the cultural blending that occurred throughout the empire. The seasonal migration patterns required by nomadic life created particular challenges for women from sedentary backgrounds who had to learn entirely new ways of managing households, caring for livestock, and adapting to constant movement. These skills, once mastered, often provided greater mobility and independence than had been available in their original communities. Language acquisition became a survival skill for many women throughout the empire. Those who could learn Mongolian, Chinese, Persian, or other widely spoken languages found better opportunities for employment, trade, and social advancement. Multilingual women often served as crucial intermediaries in the empire's complex communication network. The empire's approach to taxation and tribute collection affected women's economic roles in various ways. In some regions, women became responsible for producing specific goods required as imperial tribute, while in others they participated in monetary economies that developed to handle tax obligations. These responsibilities often shaped daily routines and family relationships. Religious syncretism encouraged by Mongol tolerance policies created unique spiritual environments where women from different faith traditions lived and worked together. This mixing often resulted in new forms of religious expression that incorporated elements from Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, shamanism, and other belief systems. The Mongol postal system required extensive support networks including food preparation, animal care, and facility maintenance. Women throughout the empire found employment in these support roles, which provided steady income and exposure to travelers and information from across the vast imperial territory. Artistic and cultural production flourished in many parts of the Mongol Empire as different traditions came into contact with each other. Women artists, craftspeople, and performers found new audiences and opportunities for creative expression, though they also faced pressure to adapt their work to imperial tastes and requirements. The empire's urban planning initiatives often created new types of living arrangements where women from various backgrounds shared neighborhoods and resources. These integrated communities required considerable negotiation and adaptation as different cultural practices regarding family life, gender roles, and social relationships came into contact. Military campaigns continued throughout the empire's existence, creating ongoing needs for support services that women often provided. These included manufacturing military equipment, providing medical care, managing supply lines, and maintaining communication networks that kept armies connected to imperial administration. The Mongol approach to record-keeping and administration created opportunities for literate women to serve in clerical and administrative roles. These positions, while often subordinate, provided economic stability and could lead to advancement within the imperial bureaucracy for women who demonstrated competence and reliability. Environmental challenges including droughts, floods, and harsh winters tested the empire's ability to support its diverse population. Women often played crucial roles in community survival during these difficult periods, utilizing traditional knowledge about food preservation, resource management, and mutual aid system. The empire's emphasis on practical skills over ethnic or cultural background created a form of meritocracy that could benefit women with valuable abilities. Whether in crafts, administration, trade, or other areas, competence could sometimes overcome the disadvantages of being from a conquered territory. Cultural memory and oral traditions preserved many stories about women's experiences during the Mongol period. These narratives, passed down through generations, provide perspectives on individual experiences that complement the official historical records maintained by imperial administration. The Mongol Empire's influence on marriage customs and family structures had lasting effects that extended well beyond the empire's political existence. Legal traditions, inheritance practices, and social expectations regarding women's roles were all influenced by the cultural mixing that occurred during this period. Trade relationships established during Mongol rule created economic networks that provided opportunities for women's participation in commerce for centuries after the empire's decline. These commercial connections became part of the foundation for later economic development across Eurasia and continued to influence women's economic opportunity. The empire's approach to conflict resolution and legal disputes created situations where women had to navigate multiple legal systems and cultural expectations simultaneously. Success in these complex environments required considerable skill in diplomacy, negotiation, and cultural adaptation. Technological innovations facilitated by the empire's cultural exchange affected women's work and daily life in numerous ways. New tools, techniques, and materials became available across vast distances, often changing traditional work patterns and creating new economic opportunities that hadn't existed previously. The question of resistance and accommodation remains central to understanding women's experiences throughout the Mongol period. Historical evidence suggests that individual responses varied enormously, with some women finding ways to maintain connections to their original cultures while others became fully integrated into Mongol society. Archaeological investigations continue to provide new insights into women's lives during this period. Household remains, personal artifacts, and settlement patterns help historians understand daily life experiences that aren't always captured in written historical record. The Mongol Empire's legacy regarding women's roles and experiences continues to influence historical understanding in many regions of the world today. Legal traditions, cultural practices, and social attitudes that developed during this period can still be traced in some contemporary societies. Seasonal work patterns throughout the empire often combined Mongol traditions with local customs, creating hybrid systems that required women to adapt to multiple sets of expectations and responsibilities depending on the time of year and specific local conditions. The empire's communication networks relied heavily on people who could function as cultural intermediaries, and women often filled these crucial roles because their positions in households and communities made them natural bridges between different cultural groups. Regional variations in imperial policy meant that women's experiences could differ dramatically depending on their location within the empire. Policies effective in Central Asian cities might be modified significantly for agricultural communities in China or pastoral regions in Eastern Europe. The preservation of women's stories and experiences from this period presents ongoing challenges for historians. Many accounts were filtered through male perspectives, and some records were lost or destroyed during the political upheavals that followed the empire's eventual decline. Medical and demographic evidence, while limited for this historical period, suggests that the population movements and cultural mixing associated with Mongol expansion had significant long-term effects on family structures, community organization, and social relationships throughout Eurasia. The role of environmental factors in shaping individual experiences cannot be overlooked. Climate change, natural disasters, and resource availability all affected how communities adapted to Mongol rule and how women specifically navigated the challenges and opportunities created by imperial expansion. Understanding these historical experiences requires careful analysis of available evidence while acknowledging the limitations of historical record. The experiences of women during the Mongol Empire period represent both individual human stories of adaptation and survival and broader patterns of cultural change that shaped the development of Eurasian civilizations for centuries to come.